Welcome back. I'm Kim Bailey and I'm with co-host Jamie Wadley, who's standing in for Fuliana for this session. And we're talking, or continuing our discussion, in fact, with Stephen Gaffney. This week we're going to look at the very clear differences between being conditionally powerful and being unconditionally powerful. And it's something that I struggled with in the research before we spoke to Stephen, and he makes it very clear in this episode. So let's get started.
I have two questions that came out of all of that conversation. If we are looking at the top level of executives who generally are on contract for 3 to 5 years, they have a certain performance measure in that period of time, they go into an organisation. I will preface it by saying we often have case studies that are sent in to us by our listeners, and so this is sort of a hybrid of some of the case studies. They go into an organisation, they know they've got this finite period of time where they have to achieve certain things that are tied to their contract. They come into an organisation that is toxic. Let's just make it as bad as it can be. They know they've only got a certain period of time. What do they tackle first?
Well, culture is always the top, right? And so, but what really is culture? Culture, I think, is not just the values, it's really the behaviors. And so when you're raising this, I have a question back to you. What would be an example of some of the toxic behavior that you might hear? And I know it's a case study, and then we can talk about how to address that.
I think the most prevalent one is that they come in and they want to know more about the organisation, know the people that are within the organisation, know their direct reports, or that the organisation is separated into areas where they won't have any influence or don't need to have any influence that they've been told. They want a better idea of the organisation. They've looked at it in terms of what they wanted out of the position that they've got. It's breaking down that barrier of who they can talk to and who they is seen as they don't need to talk to, and then finding that there's no honesty in the communication. It's merely that here is the report, no other kind of interaction at all. Very formal, very structured, very what we would call old school in terms of the hierarchy of an organisation, that someone who is in cubicle 27 can't talk to you because there's 5 levels between you. It's mostly around those areas of who they can talk to and when they can talk to them.
Yeah. So the greatest leaders I've worked with, when they get a position, they go on a listening tour. They ask a lot of questions. And, and if you had to prioritize, obviously you want to listen to all different levels of an organization. But I think what's really important is the top and the bottom. So the top is important because the people who are reporting to us are ultimately going to be with us or not and setting the tone. And then the bottom is really important because that's where you hear the ultimate messages getting conveyed. What does the ground level people hear? Now, all different levels are really important, but if you had to prioritize the time, because it's going to set the tone at the top, but I have to see what's being delivered. What is the people on the front line, so to speak? What are they hearing or not hearing? What do they think of the organization? Because that'll give you a feeling for the mid-level where things are at. And so let's talk about at the top for a moment. It's like, what's the culture we're setting, and then really assessing those leaders and really, again, finding them out. What do we need to start doing, stop doing, continue doing? What do you think needs to happen to take the organization to the next level? It doesn't have to take a long period of time, but it is a matter of asking a lot of questions. And then when we see some situations that are really not aligned with what we are, we want to change people. But I remember I used to have a television show many, many years ago. It was really bad. It was not a good show, believe me. But I interviewed successful people, and I interviewed this guy. He was a tremendous leader, but he said, if you can't change the people, change the people. And so when you really think about that, it's such simple but profound advice. Mm-hmm. We need to change, but if they're not going to change, we got to change out. And I've seen some leaders who are so hesitant to making a change. 2 things I've noticed about when we make a personnel change that I've seen over the years. 2 things always happen. The first is, after we make that personnel change, the leader always says, I can't believe I waited this long. Yeah. I can't believe I waited this long. In other words, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I've never personally witnessed a leader who moved too fast to exit somebody out. It's almost always too slow, and my personal experience has always been too slow. So there could be exceptions, but it's the first reaction is, I can't believe I waited this long. The second is, it's worse than I thought. It's worse than I thought. How does it happen? Because high achievers and people will just deal with a poor leader or poor manager. And then when you take out that person, it's like lifting up a rock. You see all the problems underneath. And so those were the issues. So I always say to people, when you're thinking about making that personal move, move fast. And the second thing is be prepared when you do that it's going to be worse than you ever thought. And absolutely every single time I've ever coached somebody, been witness to this situation, those two things have happened. So we have to move fast and be prepared that things are probably worse than we thought and deal with it accordingly.
Okay, the other question that I had out of the earlier conversation was about the timing of, or the order of communication. So you were talking about poor or unpleasant feedback, and yes, thank you for sharing, and then go on to the problem. My background is public speaking and public speaking coaching, and so I would always put it the other way around. I would always say, this is what I'm going to do, and then thank you for sharing. So what they are left with is, here's the action and the pat on the head, because we all like a pat on the head for what we've done, whether, and we'll be anxious about how they're feeling about it. The thinking in public speaking is that if you do it the other way around, they don't hear the first part, they only hear the second part. So, and I guess in this sense, it's probably not as bad as using, we always hesitate about using the words but, however, or because you use those words in between those two bits of communication, they don't hear the first thing. I was just interested in whether you think the order of communicating that information is as important as it is in public speaking.
I think what you're saying, I love it, because it's one thing to listen. Because I know, I'm going to get there, because I think I love what you're saying. Because how am I doing? Although it's not a speech, but it's a podcast.
Yes, Stephen, you may continue.
Thank you. Because, and I really do mean because, starting off with the main point understands the direction of where somebody's going. And we've all seen people who, and I've definitely had this happen. And sometimes I've made the mistake, obviously, too, where people give details and you're like, where are you going with this? And so great speakers say where we're going, because otherwise, if they're given a bunch of details, and even on one-on-one communication, if somebody's giving a lot of background, but they're not telling you the main point, we don't know how to hear that feedback. So, and where to go with that information. So when I'm coaching somebody, often I'll say, when somebody's giving me a lot of detail, I'll say, I'm sorry, but I need to ask you a question. What's the question that you have for me, such that if I could answer it would really help you? What's the question? And usually that stops people to get to the main question, or to your point, the main point. Without that, we get lost. So I love what you're saying, because I think it's really important. And that's different from being in the listening mode. Listening mode is we're inquiring. But when it's time to deliver a message, we have to get to the point and say what the main point is as quickly as possible.
Question number 4. How much time have we got left? This is one, particularly knowing that Jamie was going to be on the session with us as well, because it does relate back to very much the way he's worked for the last 30 plus years. Is there a place for entrepreneurial thinking and management in today's work environment?
Yes, because I like entrepreneurial thinking because it's about ownership. And one thing I've seen, so I wrote a book called Unconditional Power, and in fact, that's my latest book. And I can explain the distinction, but, well, actually, let me explain the distinction, because actually it'll help with this. But it deals directly with what we're talking about. The 3 kind of modes that people get in. One is a powerless mode, which is, what difference can I make? I'm only one person here. But the problem that a lot of people get is conditionally powerful, where there's a lot of excuses, where somebody might say, I can get that done as long as this happens, or as long as that happens. But the desirable mood or morale or mindset is being unconditionally powerful. In other words, that there are conditions, there are problems, but what are we focused on? What are we going to do about it? So it is really about taking control of all kinds of situations and focusing on what we're going to do about it, despite the circumstances. So I don't know if that's directly addressing, but that's what my thought is about being unconditionally powerful.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought that in, because that was one of the things that in the research I did beforehand, it was about whatever I watched, I couldn't see enough of the distinction between the conditional and the unconditional. So you've cleared that up for me, so that's good. Good work.
Well, I appreciate that. And let me give you an example. How often have we experienced where we're trying to work with somebody and they go, well, I sent them an email or I made the call. And you're like, okay, well, call them again. And if it's important, keep calling them until they return the call or figure out a way on how to deal with it differently. You know, we live in a world now where, there's all kinds of access to information, whether it's ChatGPT or one of the other systems, but no matter what is ask somebody, like, I'm trying to reach somebody, but they won't return my calls. What do I do? And so there's all kinds of ways. I mean, experts like myself and like yourself, there's all kinds of ways, but anybody, the idea of unconditional power is there's legitimate conditions, but we'll focus 100% of our energy on what are we going to do about it. In 2009, I had cancer. I'm completely fine now. But at that time, there was the Great Recession at the same time as I had this health issue. And so it was easy to start to go down the trail of like, I'll do, what I can, but, there's a lot of headwind. But I realized, the only person I can control is myself. So what am I going to do about this? I can't control that I have cancer, but I could control how I responded to the cancer. I can't control that we were in a recession, but I could control how I responded to the recession. And so I retooled my business. And from those years on, we've had our best years ever in business. It's not that I'm that smart. It's not that I realize that you got to focus on yourself and not play the blame game because we lose out.
So I just noticed you used the word headwind there. Have you got extra activities that you do apart from talking to people all the time?
Well, I had my shoulder repair, so now I'm back to working out, and but I do admittedly work a lot. So anyway, working out and then being with my family and whatnot, and so and friends and things like that. Yeah. So yeah, hobbies like that, or things like that. Does that answer it?
When you're in those environments, is your brain still working in this process about communication?
Yeah, it never gets turned off. You know what I've come to realize is people who love what they do, it's very hard to turn that off. You just keep on, even if it's in the background. So let me give you an example. I love watching Netflix and all kinds of different shows. Incidentally, Mobland, oh, it's awesome. If you haven't seen that, watch that. It's so awesome. But, you watch it and, I'm enjoying it and engrossed in it. But then there's dialogue and then you see about how people relate to each other, not about mobs, that I don't mean about Mobland, but that's probably a bad example. But I don't know, it never leaves you. How about you? Does it, are you able to disconnect from work or is it always in the background? How about for the both of you?
I'm going to let Jamie answer this.
I am always at work, regardless of where I am, I must admit. So guilty as charged. Yeah, just to stray from that bullet I'm dodging at the moment. The stuff that I heard from you about how people at the coalface are a very good metric for what's happening in the ivory tower, I find that quite profound, actually. And I could see how it's almost the Chinese whispers that come from the top and how they're perceived at that level that is the culture of any organisation. So there's things that come out of this, and I sat back listening to a lot of it because I must admit I use this as an education exercise as much as a conversation. That's the one that stuck out with me a whole lot. And the honesty in communications, I think, is just so important, and it's worth taking the risk and going through the fear barrier to talk to people and understand that they're just as scared of hearing it as you are of saying it, and see if you can get open communications to happen. And I think you've gone the hard yards because I've watched part of your interview on Mother's Day, so I know you've gone deep on so many levels. It's powerful across the board. So yeah, I've really enjoyed everything you've said, and I'm going to try to implement as much of it as I can as soon as I can because I think it'll just make any organisation better and improve the culture, maybe even from the bottom up. So yeah, it's been a very interesting exercise. Thank you.
Yet more to think about in terms of our conditional and unconditional power places, as well as the usefulness of entrepreneurial thinking and management in organisations. For now, I'm Kim Bailey. He's Jamie Wadley. We're talking with Stephen Gaffney, and this is Inside Exec.